Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. And it's quite fun for somebody who's a lapsed computational neuroscientist to then found his way to the philosophy department to kind of feel, oh, I come home again. Of course, it's unclear which department is home anymore. Mm-hmm. But in any case, what I'm doing in my work is the remit of our institute is looking at the big picture, long-range questions facing humanity. And that really means really big picture, really long-range questions, and not just the next 10 years or next 50 years, but questions about, well, are our species going to survive? Are the human condition, not just one human condition, but possible future human conditions, are we going to change? Are the technology that might change that? So we're not trying to look at very close things, but rather we try to fish in the deep seas of time and also think about what can you do in terms of arguments, reason well about the far future stuff. So some of you are going to say that I'm not just drinking the Kool-Aid, I've been taking various blotters of interesting chemicals. But since this might be the last talk, we might leave it at a suitable cosmic level. So I'm going to be talking about the idea of brain emulation, which is really going far out, really trying to do complete simulations of the brain. Not just getting a few neurons, not even a few million neurons, but all of them. And then also running simulations of all of that. And then I'm going to turn to questions about what are the ethical impacts of this kind of large-scale neural simulation. It might turn out that we're not ever going to be close to real big brain emulations. But even the partial large-scale simulations we do today might actually pose interesting ethical questions that might be worth investigating. So that leads to a question about virtual lab animals. And depending on how much time I will have, I will also get into questions about what this does to the concept of death of organisms and what might happen in the future when we actually start working on human brains, which of course causes even more fun problems, and some of the global impact this might have. But first things first, if we look at the current trends in neuroscience, we generally see that we have gone from running a small simulation by hand-cranked electromechanical computers. Hodgkin and Huxley did heroic calculations lasting weeks in order to calculate their first action potentials in the seminal paper. And now, of course, we got these lovely supercomputer simulations, and we can essentially run small pieces of cortex fairly well. We still have limits, of course, of connecting all the neurons together in a way that actually makes proper sense. But again, we have gone a long way from just having optical microscopy. We're not just getting the better resolution, we're also getting new modalities, and we're getting larger and larger scanning fields. And finally, of course, our computers are getting ridiculously powerful. Even if one is pessimistic and assumes that, yeah, Moore's law is actually going to run out and try to fit a sigmoid curve to it, it turns out that we should at least expect 100,000 times more computations per dollar per second in the long run. And that is the most pessimistic 99 percentile case. If you're more optimistic, we're going to have a ridiculously large amount of computing power eventually. Exactly how that might be useful for neuroscience is, of course, another matter. But it seems like a logical endpoint of this might actually be that we're going to be trying to eventually run one-to-one simulations. Of course, I could probably try to run a one-to-one simulation of C. elegans on my cell phone. I would probably do it pretty well if we had the right neural network connectivity. And we have plenty of computing power for small brains. But getting to the human brain might actually be the logical next step. Of course, next in this case might be about 40 years or something like that. So the idea of brain emulation, as it's often presented, is to try to cheat the artificial intelligence problem by simply copying what exists in the head. Now, as we've been discussing, of course, that little copying step is pretty complicated, actually. There's some rather serious problems in doing that. However, it's an interesting thing because it's really a closed model. You want to simulate a neural network connected to a virtual body in a virtual environment that is behaving, and then you try to learn something from that. You might want to do this just as a scientific project. Or you might say, oh yes, a brain emulation might be valuable on its own. And you might also get it for a lot of other mixed reasons. I've been using the word emulation here in a somewhat particular mode, which is slightly unusual. Normally when we talk about emulating something, we do not mean it's real. We say, yeah, he's emulating an actor. He's trying to behave like an actor, but he hasn't got any actor skills. But if you emulate something in a computer, typically you actually try to achieve a proper one-to-one connection here. So to the left here, you see the Sinclair ZX81 computer, my first home computer. Wonderful little thing. 1 kilobyte of memory connected to a television, and it had 44 times 63 pixels of black and white resolution. Wonderful thing. And a lot of people of my age and level of nerdiness, of course, want to play around with this to this day. Except that it's starting to get rather hard to find the television sets that you can even connect the computer cables to. So instead, we have a solution to the right, which is running a piece of software on a modern computer. And that software, of course, implements every operation going on inside the old computer. So it's essentially modeling what the microprocessor is doing. It's not modeling it on a purely electronic level. It's bits and bytes being moved around, but it's not the electronic gate. Although, given one of the peculiarities about how you extended this old Sinclair computer, it tended to crash if you hit the table, because the data bus was connected to the external memory. And that typically produces a very characteristic crash. So in order to get total verisimilitude, they actually have added a feature so you can press a button to get the computer to crash, simulating accidentally hitting the data bus. This works, of course, pretty well, because this computer is digital. It's a discrete system. So the things going on in terms of electric fields in the semiconductor can be well ignored, as long as you just keep the bits and bytes. Now, reconstructing this was probably not terribly hard because we had the documentation around. It actually turns out that surprisingly many early computers lack documentation. So some other people might remember the 6502 microprocessor. Again, it's probably a measure of age and nerdiness whether you care about it. But some people care deeply and they wanted to have an emulator. And they found out that there are no blueprints left for this process. Because in those days, the masks used to make the semiconductors were often edited right up until the last moment. And some of these edits are not documented and have been lost. So this particular project took a real microprocessor, took out the silicon chip, imaged it in a microscope, and then used the computer vision software to trace out the connections, find the transistors, and deduce the circuit diagram. And indeed, it worked. With the right software, it runs really old video games. So in this case, we can say that we have a successful emulation. They actually went so far to emulate even some minor electrical quirks in this system in order to actually be certain that it works. So what I'm talking about here is, could we do something similar with the brain? Now notice that this is a reconstruction of something without necessarily understanding it. There is no high-level understanding of what every part of the 6502 process was doing. There was plenty of understanding what transistors and silicon chips look like, and how we act, and how we should act when you connect them together. But there was no general understanding which part was an arithmetic unit and which one part was a memory register. That didn't actually matter. What mattered was that it was put into the right kind of environment, the software for running the computer game, and that you had enough low-level information. So the idea underlying the concept of brain emulation is that, well, maybe this could work. So this is really taking the emergent view to its logical extreme. It's also a pretty good way of testing the emergentist view. If we actually had a complete description on one level, would you get something emerging from that that looks like real brain activity, real behavior, or perhaps even a real mind? Now, the question is, of course, how much work would that be? Well, obviously an awful lot of work. So Sebastian Silmi and his connectomics people have been doing this lovely work about taking 3D voxel images and trying to trace out neurons. And our current problem is, of course, that, yeah, it's a ridiculous amount of effort going into even such a small sub-micron thing like this one. Especially since when you try to do nice flood fills and some similar things, it doesn't work because the data is noisy and have errors. Hence you need to develop better algorithms. But if you can do that properly, of course, you end up with some very nice maps that potentially you could use to deduce the connectivity of a brain, although this is just structure and doesn't have any interest in chemistry. You could learn quite a lot from it. And I'm bringing this up because there is something interesting in this debate about, well, is just gathering loads of data useful for neuroscience or not? Because I think there is another impact. Having a lot of data also gets people to start working on new and clever ways of handling it. So Sebastian had this problem that the flood fill algorithms to fill out neurons didn't work because it was noisy and messy data. So he got some computer vision people to start working on trying to figure out where are the borders of the nerve cells and trace them out. It turns out that computer vision is actually not quite up to the task either. His algorithms were not good enough. Humans are, however, cheap and easy to get to fill the neurons, and apparently enough people think it's fun enough that you can actually do crowdsourcing of internet. So his project about tracing neurons in retina had been quite successful. So here he got volunteers who spent time filling out neurons, which of course produce really useful ground truth data to train the computer vision algorithms that might hopefully trace up larger volumes. It's also an interesting demonstration that you might need a bit of creativity here, because eventually we're going to reach peak crowdsourcing. There are only so many people who really love to trace neurons. And if you pay them, maybe you get some, but it's not terribly motivating. There are a lot of people who find it relaxing, a bit like knitting to trace neurons. And unfortunately, if we could get 7 billion people to just all do a few neurons each, we would be able to trace up the entire brain, but that's pretty unlikely. I think the pool of people who love to trace neurons is pretty small. So we need to make the most out of it. But the thing is, crowdsourcing as a science, or as a method for science, is something we more or less invented ad hoc about 10 years ago, and we still haven't got our act together. Over in Oxford, we got the Galaxy Zoo people in the astronomy department who are using people to classify galaxies. And they have incidentally found that this community of people who actually watch an awful lot of galaxies start noticing interesting patterns in the objects that astronomers have missed. Actually, harnessing these powers of crowdsourcing turns out to be, you can develop methodologies for it, you can develop statistical tests, there are ways of getting around the fact that some people are just trying to mess things up. And that seems to be a quite useful tool. This is, of course, very, very different from discussing statistical methods or various computational methods we've been talking about, but it seems to be equally relevant for doing this kind of large-scale brain mapping, actually figuring out how to harness this. So generally, getting these big data sets tend to inspire people to do quite surprising things. In my own field of computer science, when I started, string matching was mostly a matter of searching in text. Then bioinformatics happened, people realized, genes, they're kind of text. And it led to an enormous growth in development of algorithms for string matching, which were really useful and of course paid off well in bioinformatics, which then fed back into computer science. So I'm pretty confident that if we get these enormous data sets, we're going to stimulate an awful lot of computer scientists and other disciplines just because the data set is there, that we're actually going to start working harder. But I'm not going to talk much about that. I'm going to kind of talk about this blue sky vision of eventually getting a pipeline where you take a brain, you maybe fix it, you slice it up using some suitable method, you scan it using suitable methods. These scans are then automatically interpreted, and you run it on a suitable nearby giant supercomputer, and hopefully you get some behavior out of it, which corresponds to the original brain. And you might call this, of course, a pipeline reading. We're not far away from that, even from very, very small brains. But I think it's an interesting question. Could you actually do this as a kind of cohesive vision to actually get different communities to talk to each other? It might actually be quite useful. Also, I'm not going to really talk about the rather hefty load of assumptions that need to go into the feasibility of brain emulation. There are obvious philosophical issues, and since I'm a lousy philosopher of mind and I wouldn't dare say anything about that with certain people in the audience, I'm going to keep away from it. I would just like to point out my own favorite point, and that's the question of scale separation. This whole project is kind of based on the idea that there is some size resolution below which you don't need to care. Everything averages out, so you do not need to simulate all the little details. You just need to go on the higher size scales. If this is true, then it should be doable, unless, of course, the size scale is ridiculously low, like on the atomic level. Finding the size scale might actually be a quite interesting project. This kind of project would, of course, involve both questions about statistical mechanics and complex systems, but also having chains of models piled on top of each other. So you can see that coarse graining or fine-grained model leads to the same behavior, and you can use that to try to track down where the size scales are. This is, of course, very, very similar to the European brain project, their aims. Actually having ground truth models and good methods of validation is absolutely essential for answering this question, which incidentally is both a good basic research question and kind of interesting for thinking about what the brain is doing. At what level do we have error correction, and at what level is actually noise playing an important role? But I've been kind of hanging around the ethics department too long, so I'm going to be talking more about the ethics side. So, in general, the problem is, of course, that most people who use lab animals actually do admit that they're not comfortable with actually using the animals as tool. And of course, the people picketing outside the lab, they certainly don't think we should be using as many lab animals, or any at all. And the critics have a lot of interesting points in that, well, maybe a lot of these experiments could be replaced with simulations. And of course, if you had a simulation that was by assumption one-to-one and gave exactly the right result, that would be even better. You would get an accurate result. So I'm pretty certain that people picketing outside the neuroscience labs of Oxford would be delighted with brain emulation. Except, of course, for one reason, and that's there's going to be a whole pile of animals that need to be scanned and destroyed in the process of getting there. So maybe the price is not worth paying to them. But at least from a utilitarian standpoint, might be that if we could scan the generic mouse, and everybody is always using that mouse, there is no suffering whatsoever whenever we do experiments. Except, of course, as you might guess, that, well, maybe virtual mice might also suffer. If I reach in with my virtual reality glove in the virtual simulation and pinch the virtual tail of the virtual mouse, simulated C5 cell, the actual potential simulated by the Hodgkin-Huxley equations up to the brain, various things happen, and the virtual mouse squeals and tries to get away from me. Did I just do something unethical there? Or was this just a demonstration, a lot of computer power wasted for some slightly frivolous pursuit? That's something that I think is an interesting question. Also, some of you might have been thinking, wait a minute, what can we then learn from this kind of low-level model? A lot of the discussion has been about what's the right approach to actually learn something important about the mind and brain. And I would agree that a successful brain emulation might actually not tell us anything about the mind or our high-level behaviors. It might certainly be easier to do a lot of research. If you had virtual mice, you could do a lot of experiments on very rapidly and efficiently. But it is, I think, important to realize that there might be other reasons we would develop this, and it might also be a kind of side effect of the research that is mainly aiming at the proper scientific goals. But getting over to the virtual mice and whether we should pinch them or not. So in general, when dealing with animal ethics, I guess a lot of you actually have to deal with animal ethics when doing experiments. So you have probably been exposed to the various theories about why should we give moral considerations to animals. And there are various approaches. Some theories argue that actually animals don't matter. It's what it does to you that matters. Other theories would say, yeah, they're a bit like us, not completely like us, and that's why we should care about them. They have lives too. And others would say, suffering is suffering. We should actually not treat anything that can suffer badly. So the most famously, of course, the indirect theories, we have Immanuel Kant, who argues that if somebody mistreats his dog, well, the dog doesn't matter in the equation, but the person who's bad to his dog is probably a bad person, and we should shun him and avoid doing like that. He's kind of making humans look bad. So by this account, of course, if I'm pinching virtual mice and gleefully boasting about it, I'm probably a pretty bad and cruel person. That's bad. So maybe we should treat the virtual mice just as well as we treat normal mice. Yeah, maybe we're wrong to do that, but it's a bit like petting a doll. The doll hasn't got a nervous system, doesn't experience anything, but yet it's a kind of compassionate gesture and might speak well about it. Other theories would argue that no, animals actually have lives of their own. They matter. They have, to some extent, desires. They have, to some extent, goals. They might be experience things. And in that case, we shouldn't be interfering with the life project too much. Again, there is a lot of theories here, and how much we're allowed to interfere, of course, depends very much on the theory. So many of these ones would not argue that that's why animals have the same rights as humans, but rather that, well, sometimes humans have to use animals. But if you can avoid it, avoid it. And then, of course, we have ideas that, well, suffering is suffering, we shouldn't care at all. The question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? So this one, of course, gets to the real fun, headache-inducing question, what our software is up to. Also, some theories are actually interactionist. They've been coming a bit, for example, from feminist philosophy, thinking that actually it's about a relationship to them, which might again matter if the virtual mouse behaves like a normal mouse, and I like mice, maybe I shouldn't be mistreating it. So when we have simulations like these educational simulations, I think we can generally agree that, well, that's probably not real suffering. Although I might give electric shock in the simulated Skinner box, what's actually going on is more or less like mistreating a Tamagotchi or other computer game character. It's a simple little finite state machine. It's not even a proper neural network. Indeed, the reason that led to me starting writing this paper actually began many years ago when I was leaving my office and I just shut down my desktop computer and realized, oh, I just erased today's neural network. 100 neurons disappeared out into nothing, and everything I had learned over the afternoon disappeared. Had I done something bad there? I quickly decided that, wait a minute, there are probably bacteria on the floor that have more complicated biochemical signaling networks, and I'm stepping on them without caring. Okay, yeah, I'm probably all right. The problem is, of course, that it's not clear how small a network of something that's interacting can be, and it still matters. In fact, you can argue that there is a kind of small network problem, but whatever your theory of consciousness is, you can probably demonstrate a really cut-down organism or a cut-down network of something that has that property, and you wouldn't exactly call it conscious. On the other hand, size doesn't seem to matter entirely too, because you can imagine having a gigantic, randomly wired brain. But if it's randomly wired, it's very unlikely to be properly conscious too, because it's just some random emergent activity that doesn't have any proper meaning. And it's interesting that people researching consciousness actually sometimes create things that I think are ethically downright creepy. So this is Rodney Cottery's Cyberchild, which has a fairly complicated internal structure based on a lot of different brain areas, motor cortex, cerebellum, basal ganglia, a lot of brainstem. It has internal bodily states corresponding to how full its bladder is, blood sugar level in the bloodstream, how full the stomach is. There are learning aspects to it all. And if the blood sugar level gets below a certain level, it dies. The simulation ends. So the little baby can produce behaviors, mostly flailing its arms around and screaming. And the point is, it's supposed to learn how to get food. And this was based on Rodney's ideas about consciousness. So he actually tried to get a model where he thought consciousness, according to his model, could emerge. Now, this is very fun to compare with this quote from Thomas Metzinger, where he's suggesting in his book that what would you say if somebody came along and said, hey, we want to genetically engineer mentally retarded human infants. Really good for research. And he's getting into this righteous rage in this quote. I don't know if you can read it very well over there. You would certainly think this was not only an absurd and appalling, but also dangerous idea. It would hopefully not pass any ethics committee in the democratic world. However, what today's ethics committee don't see is how the first machines, satisfying a minimally sufficient set of constraints for conscious experience, could be just like such mentally retarded infants. I asked Thomas about that. He didn't know about the Cyberchild, but it kind of fits in here rather nicely. So, at least according to Metzinger, there might be certain systems that exhibit the right properties that we are normatively not allowed to mistreat them. And if you think about the existence of that poor Cyberchild, it's existing this endless black space, and the only things it can experience is hunger, full nappies, and occasionally that a bottle is dangling in front of him. That is kind of creepy. Especially since we originally actually wanted to demonstrate some model of consciousness. I'm not certain it was phenomenal consciousness or exactly what model it was, but it's interesting to see this problem. Of course, the question whether you can have conscious software has been ongoing for quite a long while. Daniel Dennett has this classic paper about why you can't make a computer that feels pain. Of course, argue mostly that it's because we don't really know what pain is. And he also concludes in an interesting way that, well, eventually we might be able to build a machine that has experiential states. And in the meantime, if there is such a cultural lag, thoughtful people would refrain from kicking such a robot. So generally, it seems like we have, of course, this profound disagreement about can software have experience. And then on one side, we have people talking about Chinese room, Searle, and the whole community thinking that, no, that's just moving symbols around, there's nothing going on there. On the other hand, of course, we have hardcore functionalists who might say, yeah, of course, software can experience. So being a wussy Swede who can't really bring myself to strongly take sides, and I'm certainly confused about the philosophy of mind, my approach would be to just assume, well, let's make sure we don't do anything stupid. So I would propose this principle as, let's assume the software is actually potentially conscious. Yes, you might say that you have a theory that really proves that software couldn't possibly be conscious, but philosophers have occasionally been wrong in the past. We have occasionally been wrong about what is conscious and not, and what has moral and value and not. So it would probably be a bit risky to really risk not treating conscious entities that have the right to some moral consideration. Now this principle is kind of interesting because it actually suggests that we should have a bit of virtual lab animal ethics. One of the nicest things is that if we say we should probably be treating virtual lab mice just the same way we treat normal lab mice, is that we can take the textbook of what we ought to be doing with the real lab mice and see what we should be doing in our simulations. So the most obvious thing is, of course, reducing suffering. The good news is that we can actually do quite a lot of that in a simulation. After all, you might want to leave out the pain systems of your emulation. Unlike in real animals, you can even do this in a reversible manner. It's literally as simple, I think, as commenting out code. It might be possible to run simulated painkillers. Again, by ignoring a lot of chemistry and just blocking the right receptors or leaving them out at the right time from simulation, you can do this. In fact, there are quite a lot of interesting things you can do on a virtual lab animal, but from an ethical standpoint would be marvelous if you could do on real lab animals. There are also interesting questions about the quality of virtual life. So a simulated C. elegans probably doesn't care very much about its environment. It's not really clear how much C. elegans cares about their environment. But I think we would agree that it does matter for our lab animals whether it exists in an environment that feels at home to it. So the virtual mouse might actually need something more realistic, which might of course also include a body simulation that's not just adequate to move around, but might actually have some of the feedbacks that are relevant. Maybe the fur needs to be right, or the smells need to be right. So this poses an interesting, real serious challenge, because understand the life worlds of lab animals can be rather tricky. They're very different. This is, of course, where a lot of the earlier research, long before we have any risk of running into something that actually satisfies this an argument from analogy, which underlies, of course, a lot of the standard arguments about real animals, but might also apply very strongly here, that they're so similar to a real system that we should care about morally. And then in that case, yes and no, in that case we need to care about them. Also, we end up with weird things like euthanasia for software. Sometimes you might want to delete it. The interesting part is, of course, death becomes quite a reversible thing to see if you can bring them back from backup. So I've been running out of time rather seriously here. So I haven't had the time to actually get into the interesting questions, what happened about the unitarity of death, or the even more fun question, what happens when you eventually, maybe one day, get to human test subjects. But maybe we can do that over the questions. Thank you.